Hello, this is Nouriel Roubini. I'm a professor of economics at New York University. I'm also the chairman of Roubini Global Economics, an economic consultancy. Today I would like to give you my outlook for the US economy for this year, 2010, and the policy challenges that are going to be facing the administration. Here the dilemma that policymakers are facing is damn if you do and damn if you don't. This past year, the budget deficit was more than 10% of GDP and is expected we're going to have deficits of 9 trillion over the next decade to double the amount of the public debt from 40 to 80% of GDP. If you take this very large budget deficit seriously and their monetization by the Fed that has been printing money to finance them seriously, that would mean that you'll have to increase taxes and reduce government spending and mop up all this excess liquidity sooner rather than later. But if you were to follow this exit strategy too soon, then you'll make a policy mistake. Because while the recovery of private demand is still weak, if you take away the monetary and the fiscal stimulus, the economy is going to fall back again into a recession and to deflation. So if it looks like that there is no constraint to the deficit, and there is even a risk that the Republicans are going to win the House in November, so we'll have a divided government, the Republicans are going to veto tax increases, the Democrats are going to veto tax spendings, and if we cannot raise taxes or cut spending, then the path of least resistance is to keep on running the printing presses. The Fed will keep on buying treasuries and agency debt like they've done in 2009, and eventually this monetary financing of large fiscal deficits is going to lead to an increase in expected inflation that's going to push up long-term interest rates on government bonds, is going to push up mortgage rates, and you'll have a crowding out of the recovery. That's why I say, damn if you do and damn if you don't. If you exit too soon, you make a mistake. If you exit too late, you make another mistake. And the risk is that in an election year, the path that leads you the exit right is very narrow knife edge, and the risk of a major policy mistake on one side or the other one is going to be very large. And the mood in Washington today is not one of bipartisanship. The Republicans have decided that they don't want to cooperate with the Democrats on any topic because so far the strategy of not cooperating on the budget, on healthcare, has been successful. They won in Virginia, they won in New Jersey, they won in Massachusetts. It seems like the Republicans are saying, who cares if the economy is going to go down the tube? We're not going to collaborate with the Democrats. And if that leads to a double-dip recession, so be it. We're going to win the midterm election. We're going to win also the 2002 presidential election. And Obama is going to be one-term president. So the approach of the Republican is essentially of no cooperation. And the approach also of the Democrats so far has been of limited cooperation with the Republicans. They did not cooperate on the budget process. They did not cooperate on the healthcare plan. And therefore, Washington is as divided as ever. So I see very much a risk of a policy divide, of divided government, of the two-party fighting, rather than cooperating together to resolve our problems.
The biggest problem facing America today is that the people in Washington making economic decisions pay absolutely no price for being wrong. I understand many of them have really good intentions for the country, and they want America to get out of this economic slump, but that's simply not the way to do it. The only way to bring America out of this economic crisis is to allow private citizens to make their own choices without the government acting as a third party and intervening. In fact, the reason we got into this whole crisis to begin with is because the government told large institutions that no matter what it did, it could not fail. And then we were surprised that they made really, really bad decisions. Only private citizens can bring us out of this economic crisis. The government should just get out of the way. It has enough to worry about.
It's true that the solution to this financial crisis depends in part on the behavior of the private sector, but also depends on sound economic policy. Part of the mistake we did for the last decade that led to this crisis was this laissez-faire approach, saying the government should not intervene in the economy or the financial system, not even with prudential regulation and supervision of the financial system. This laissez-faire approach of relying only on markets, on self-regulation by financial institutions, miserably failed because there is greed, there is excessive risk-taking in the private sector. And therefore, we cannot just say this is going to be the private sector resolving this problem. You need the private sector on one side to have the right incentives. On the other side, you need sound and good public policy. On one side, is it correct to argue that this crisis was due to excessive leverage and debt accumulation by households, by the financial system, even by the corporate sector? And now we're socializing, as I pointed out, some of these private losses, so there is now debt accumulation and deficits by the government. Now, this excessive accumulation of debt by the government eventually might be risky, but in a situation in which private demand, consumption, investment, exports, residential investment had collapsed, the only way we could avoid the free fall of the economy and another Great Depression was by reducing taxes on one side, but also increasing government spending on the other side. So the government had to make up for the fall in private demand. So the idea that the government should have stayed out of business and done nothing was proven wrong during the Great Depression, because the lack of a monetary stimulus and a fiscal stimulus and the collapse of banks led to a free fall of the real economy. That's why we needed a monetary easing. That's why we needed to raise government spending, to reduce taxes, and to stimulate the economy and to help and backstop financial institutions and avoid their collapse. On the other side, it's correct that over time, and in the long run, excessive accumulation of public debt because of large budget deficits is also dangerous, because it can lead to fiscal train wreck and or their monetization to high inflation. So of course, it's not a free lunch running budget deficits. Eventually, we need to raise taxes and cut spending. So we find this challenge of a need for more government stimulus in the short run and less government stimulus and more consolidation of deficits over the medium term. That's the right policy approach. Not one of saying, let's spend each other forever, nor the one of saying the government should stay out of any business in the private sector. Neither one of those extreme approaches works.